The shovel blade sliced into the hillside with a sound like a tearing root. It was a clean sound, the only sound besides the wind whispering through the pines and the soft panting of the dog. Elias drove the shovel down again, his weight on the worn wooden step, feeling the familiar jarring shock travel up his arms and into his shoulders. The earth was dense here, a mix of dark soil and stubborn clay packed tight by 1,000 winters. He lifted the load, turned, and threw it onto a growing pile 10 feet down the slope. The motion was practiced, economical, a rhythm he had settled into weeks ago. He did not rush, he did not rest. Boulder, a great black dog with a chest as broad as a barrel and eyes the color of burnt caramel, watched from the shade of an old oak. He lay with his paws crossed, his head up, tracking Elias's every move. A fly buzzed near his ear, and he shook his massive head once, a gesture of mild annoyance, before his gaze settled back on the boy and the hole he was carving into the land. The hole wasn't a hole, not really. It was the beginning of a shelf, a level terrace cut into the south-facing incline of what the old maps called Whisper Ridge. It was the first of 3. His parents were 2 months gone, taken by the fever that had swept through the valley in the late spring. The silence in their small, drafty cabin at the bottom of the hill was a physical weight. He had buried them himself, next to the creek, under the birch trees they had loved. He had said the words his father had taught him, and then he had returned to the cabin, packed a small sack of tools, and walked up the hill with Boulder at his side. He had not returned to the old cabin since. He slept under the stars, wrapped in a wool blanket, the dog a warm, living anchor beside him. The work was his grief. Each shovelful of earth was a moment he did not have to think. The sweat that stung his eyes was a feeling more present than the ache in his chest. His hands, already calloused from a life of farm work, were now layered with new blisters that broke, bled, and hardened into leather. He was 17, but his body felt older, forged into something new by the singular, consuming purpose of the task. He was digging his home out of the earth itself. It was Mr. Abernathy who spoke first. He was their closest neighbor, a man whose face was a road map of 70 hard winters, his hands gnarled like oak roots. He appeared one afternoon at the edge of the clearing, leaning on a hickory walking stick, his faded blue eyes narrowed against the sun. Boulder gave a low woof, not of aggression but of announcement. Elias stopped, his shovel halfway to the pile. He nodded. "Mr. Abernathy." "Elias," the old man said, his voice raspy. He surveyed the scene, the deep cut in the hill, the neat piles of topsoil and clay, the careful lines marked with string and stakes. "Son, what in God's name are you doing?" Elias wiped his forehead with the back of a dirty forearm. "Building." "Building what? A root cellar the size of a barn?" Abernathy took a few stiff steps closer, his boots crunching on loose stones. "Your father's cabin is down there. A good, stout cabin. Needs a little chinking is all." "It's cold," Elias said. The words were quiet, but clear. Abernathy grunted, a sound of dismissal. "Everything's cold come January, boy. That's why God gave us firewood and common sense." He gestured with his stick at the excavated shelf. "You're digging in. The damp will get in your bones. You'll be sick before the first snow." "I have a plan," Elias said. He turned and drove the shovel back into the earth. It was his father's plan, really. It was all there, in the worn leather journal filled with his father's neat, angular script and precise drawings. Pages of observations about the sun's angle in winter, about thermal mass and the insulating properties of packed earth. a lifetime of watching and thinking, condensed into ink. "The earth is a blanket," his father had written. "You just have to know how to pull it over you." "A plan," Abernathy scoffed, though not unkindly. He saw the grief in the boy's rigid shoulders, the exhaustion in the slump of his back. "Listen to me, Elias. I've seen 50 winters in this valley. I've seen men try all sorts of clever things. Ice houses that melt by June, windmills that get torn apart by the first real gust. You build a house up, off the ground, where the air can move. You don't bury yourself like a badger." Elias did not answer. He just kept digging. The rhythm was all that mattered. Shovel in, lift, turn, throw. "Wait until winter," Abernathy said, shaking his head. It was not a threat, but a prophecy. He turned and walked away, his form shrinking as he descended the path. "You'll see." The words hung in the air, but Elias did not let them settle. He had the journal, he had the memory of his father's quiet confidence, and he had the work. The work was enough. Weeks bled into a month. The first terrace was complete, a level shelf 20 feet wide and 40 feet long, cut 14 feet deep into the hill at its back. The rear wall was a sheer face of packed earth and stone. He began digging the second terrace below it, another 14-foot drop, and then the third. It was a giant staircase carved into the landscape. People started to notice. Mrs. Gable, whose farm bordered theirs to the east, came by with a basket of bread and stew. She was a kind woman, round and soft, who had always had a gentle word for his mother. She watched him for a long time, her brow furrowed with concern, as he used a system of levers and a wooden sledge to move a large, flat stone into place. "Elias, dear," she said, her voice full of worry, "you're working yourself to the bone. You're just a boy. You can't live up here like this." "I'm fine, Mrs. Gable," he said, not pausing in his effort to position the stone. "But what is it? It doesn't look like any house I've ever seen." "It's a terrace cabin," he said, giving the term voice for the first time. The words felt right. "A terrace cabin," she repeated, the phrase foreign on her tongue. "Mr. Abernathy says you'll catch your death of damp." "He's wrong," Elias said. The stone settled into place with a soft thud. He straightened up, his back screaming in protest. "Oh, Elias," she sighed, placing the basket on a stump. "Your parents would want you to be safe, to be sensible." He looked at her, his gray eyes steady. "This is for them." He didn't explain. He couldn't. How could he describe the elegant physics in his father's journal, the careful calculations of heat retention and airflow? How could he explain that every stone he placed was an act of faith, a monument to a man who had seen the world differently? They saw a boy digging a hole. He was building a sanctuary. He thanked her for the food, and she left, her face a mask of pity and apprehension. He and Boulder shared the stew that night, sitting by a small fire, the vast, silent staircase of earth rising behind them. The dog rested his heavy head on Elias's knee, a comforting, unconditional weight. The stars were brilliant in the cold, clear air. Winter was coming. He could feel it in the changing angle of the light. He had so much more to do. Summer burned into the hazy gold of late autumn. The aspens on the far ridge turned a brilliant, trembling yellow, then shed their leaves like coins. Elias worked from the first hint of dawn until the last light failed, a relentless, steady engine of purpose. The 3 terraces were dug, the retaining walls of native stone set without mortar, each rock chosen and fitted like a piece in a vast, dry puzzle. His father's journal had been explicit. The stones must breathe. They must settle with the earth, not fight it. He had spent a full month just hauling the stones, using Boulder as a draft animal, a custom harness slung over the dog's powerful shoulders to drag a sledge. The dog worked without complaint, seeming to understand the gravity of their task. The structure began to take shape. The lowest level, the third terrace, was the main living space. It was the deepest, its back wall of earth and stone rising a full 14 feet. The side walls were also earth-sheltered, leaving only the south-facing front exposed. He built this front wall not of logs, but of a heavy timber frame designed to hold enormous panes of glass. He had salvaged them from the abandoned textile mill downriver, a perilous 2-day journey with a handcart. He had spent his parents' last $17 to buy them from the man who owned the land. The glass was thick, wavy, and imperfect, but it was strong. Mr. Sterling saw him hauling the glass. Sterling owned the largest cattle ranch in the county, a man whose wealth insulated him from the harsher realities of the seasons. He rode a fine black horse and sat in his saddle with an air of unshakable authority. He reined in beside Elias, who was struggling to maneuver the handcart over a rutted section of road. "That's a fool's errand, son," Sterling said, his voice laced with the easy condescension of the powerful. "Glass like that will crack in the first deep freeze. You're building a house of ice." Elias just adjusted his grip on the cart's handle and pulled. Boulder, harnessed beside him, growled low in his chest, a sound that was pure, resonant warning. A proper house is made of oak logs, 16 inches thick, with moss and mud for chinking. Not this. Sterling gestured vaguely up the hill towards the strange earthen scar. "Abernathy thinks you've lost your mind to grief. I'm beginning to think he's right." "It will work," Elias said, his voice tight with effort. "Famous last words," Sterling chuckled, shaking his head. He spurred his horse and cantered away, leaving Elias in a cloud of dust. The encounter settled a cold knot in Elias's stomach, not of fear, but of anger. It was a quiet, slow-burning fuel. He would prove them all wrong. The second level was set back from the first, its floor the roof of the level below. This would be his workshop and food storage. The top level, the first one he had dug, was the smallest, a sleeping loft. The roofs were the most critical part. He laid heavy beams, then thick planking. On top of this, he layered sheets of treated hide, a waterproofing technique from the journal, and then covered it all with 2 feet of sod and earth, carefully transplanting the native grasses. The roofs became extensions of the hillside itself. From above, the cabin would almost disappear. Only the 3 south-facing walls of timber and glass would be visible. Inside, the back walls were lined with dark, flat stones, chosen for their ability to absorb and hold heat. A massive stone chimney and hearth formed the core of the lowest level, designed to be the primary heat source. The journal showed how the smoke and heat would be channeled through a clever system of stone-lined flues running beneath the floors of the upper 2 levels, before venting out a single, low-profile chimney at the very top of the structure. The rising heat from the lower level would warm the floors of the ones above it. The sun, striking the south-facing glass, would pour solar energy into the stone walls and floors, which would then slowly radiate the warmth back out through the night. It was a living system, a slow, deep breath of heat. He met Anya in late October. She was Mr. Abernathy's granddaughter, visiting from the city to help her aging grandfather prepare for winter. Elias saw her first from a distance, a flash of a red scarf as she helped the old man stack firewood. A few days later, she walked up the hill. She didn't bring pity or advice, only a canteen of fresh water and a quiet curiosity. Boulder trotted to meet her, tail giving a tentative wag. She knelt and scratched him behind the ears, unafraid of his size. "He's beautiful," she said, her voice clear and bright. "His name is Boulder," Elias said, surprised at how rusty his own voice sounded. She stood and looked at his work, her eyes taking in the strange, tiered structure. He braced himself for the usual questions, the thinly veiled skepticism. "It's like the ancient cliff dwellings," she said, her head tilted. "The ones out west. They built into the cliffs to stay cool in the summer and warm in the winter." Elias stared at her. No one had ever made that connection. "My father studied them, in books." "So the hill is the insulation," she said, pointing, "and the glass lets the winter sun in when it's low in the sky." He could only nod, a profound sense of relief washing over him. To be seen, to be understood without having to explain, was a gift he hadn't realized he craved. "My grandfather says it won't work," she said, her tone neutral. "He says the cold will come right through that glass." "He doesn't see the whole design," Elias said. "The stone stores the heat. The earth holds it in. Each level will be warmer than the one outside. The top level will be the warmest." It was the most he had said to anyone in months. 10 degrees warmer? For each level? She asked, a guess so precise it startled him. He looked at her again, a real look this time. He saw the intelligence in her dark eyes, the genuine interest. "That's the plan." She smiled, a small, quick smile that lit up her face. "I hope it works." Her visits became a quiet routine. She would walk up the hill in the afternoons, sometimes with a book, sometimes just to sit and watch him work, talking to Boulder in low, soft tones. She asked questions, not about his sanity, but about the mechanics of his work. How did he move the big timbers? What kind of stone held heat the best? Her presence was a balm, a silent counterpoint to the chorus of doubt from the valley below. By the first week of November, the cabin was enclosed. The glass was in, sealed with a mixture of pine pitch and tallow. The doors were hung, thick and heavy. The interior was Spartan, but finished. He built simple furniture from leftover lumber, a table, 2 chairs, a bed frame in the top loft. The flue system was complete, tested with small, smoky fires that drew perfectly. He spent a week hauling and splitting firewood, stacking it against the western wall of the lowest terrace, enough for the whole winter. He felt the season turning in his bones. The air grew sharp. The wind had a new, biting edge. The sky was the color of slate. Mr. Abernathy made one last visit. He stood at the entrance to the lowest level, peering into the dim interior. The first real fire was burning in the hearth, casting a warm, flickering glow on the stone walls. "It's a cave," the old man said, shaking his head. "A fancy cave with windows." "It's home," Elias replied. He was cleaning his tools, wiping them with an oiled rag before storing them for the winter. "The snow is coming, boy. A real heavy one. I can feel it in my joints. The wolves are coming down from the high country already. That's a bad sign." He looked at the vast panes of glass. "When the wind hits 70 miles an hour and the ice builds up a foot thick, that glass will explode. You'll freeze in an hour." "It's stronger than you think," Elias said. "Everything's strong until it breaks," Abernathy retorted. He sighed, a long, weary sound. "I came to make an offer. My Anya, she's worried for you. We have a spare room. You and the dog are welcome to it. No shame in admitting you made a mistake." It was an act of kindness, born of deep-seated worry. Elias understood that. "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy, but we're staying here." "Stubborn as your father," the old man muttered. He looked from Elias's determined face to the strange, half-buried house. "Don't say I didn't warn you." He turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped against the coming cold. That night, the temperature plummeted. The first snowflakes drifted down, small and hesitant at first, then larger and thicker, swirling in the wind. Elias stood in the doorway of the lowest level, Boulder at his side, and watched the world turn white. He placed a hand on the stone wall inside. It was cool to the touch, but not cold. It felt like a hibernating animal, storing energy, waiting. He checked the thermometer his father had left him, hanging on the outside wall. It read 20 degrees. Inside, another thermometer near the back wall read 32. A 12-degree difference, with only a small fire burning. He closed the heavy door, the sound a solid, final thud. The wind howled outside, a mournful, rising shriek. Inside, there was only the crackle of the fire and the quiet sound of his own breathing. He climbed the stone steps to the second level. The air was noticeably warmer. The thermometer there read 45 degrees. He continued to the top sleeping loft. It was warmer still, the heat from the flue under the floor radiating a gentle, comfortable warmth. The thermometer beside his bed read 58 degrees. It was warmer in his sleeping loft than it had been in his parents' drafty cabin on a mild autumn day. He lay down on his cot, pulling a single wool blanket over him. Boulder curled up on a rug on the floor below, his breathing already deep and even. Outside, the storm was just beginning. Elias was not afraid. He was ready. He had built his home not against the winter, but with it. He had listened to the earth, to the sun, and to the quiet wisdom in his father's journal. And he had faith in the work of his own 2 hands. He closed his eyes and slept, a deep and dreamless sleep, for the first time in a very long time. The house held him in its warm, earthen embrace. The storm was not a storm. It was a siege. For 3 days, the world disappeared behind a solid, vertical wall of driving snow. The wind screamed, a relentless physical force that shook the ancient oaks and sent drifts piling up against any obstacle. In the valley, the people huddled in their sensible, drafty cabins, feeding their fires constantly, feeling the cold seep through the chinking and under the doors. The temperature dropped to 10 degrees, then 0, then 10 below. It was a cold that killed, a cold that found every weakness. In his terrace cabin, Elias lived in a different world. The wind was a distant, muffled roar, the sound filtered through feet of earth and snow. The drifts piled up against the glass walls, rising higher and higher, but instead of a threat, they became another layer of insulation. The snow buried the house, sealing it further from the killing wind. Light still filtered through the upper portions of the glass, a diffuse, serene glow that filled the interior spaces. The fire in the hearth never raged. He kept it banked, a steady, efficient burn. The massive stone hearth absorbed the heat and radiated it back slowly, evenly. The lowest level, the living space, held at a steady 40 degrees. It was cool, but it was not a dangerous cold. It was the temperature of a cellar, a place of preservation. The second level, his workshop, was a comfortable 55. The top loft, where he slept, was a pleasant 65 degrees. He moved through his days in a state of quiet wonder, checking the thermometers, feeling the warmth of the floor beneath his feet, a constant, gentle reassurance. This was not luck. This was physics. This was his father's legacy made real. Boulder was content, dozing by the hearth or following Elias from level to level, his tail giving a lazy thump of approval whenever Elias added a log to the fire. Elias spent his time organizing his tools, reading his father's journal again, and simply watching the snow fall. He felt a profound sense of peace, of safety. The house was working. It was performing exactly as designed. On the morning of the 4th day, the wind finally lessened, though the snow still fell heavily. It was then that he heard it, a desperate, frantic pounding on the thick oak door of the lowest level. Boulder shot to his feet, a deep growl rumbling in his chest. Elias quieted him with a hand on his back and went to the door. He had to put his shoulder into it, pushing against the weight of the snowdrift outside. When he finally forced it open a foot, Mr. Abernathy tumbled in, covered in snow, his face pale and his breath coming in ragged, steaming gasps. Behind him stood Anya, her face wrapped in a scarf, her eyes wide with fear and cold. "Elias," Abernathy gasped, leaning against the stone wall, his chest heaving. My roof. A section gave way. The snow. It's filling the house. The fire's out. We're freezing." Elias looked past him at Anya. She was shivering violently, her lips tinged with blue. He wasted no time. "Get in, both of you. Get to the top level. It's the warmest." He helped Abernathy, who was stiff with cold, up the stone steps. Anya followed, her movements clumsy, her body exhausted. When they reached the sleeping loft, the change in temperature was so dramatic that Abernathy stopped, his mouth falling open. He looked from the thermometer reading 66 degrees to Elias, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. "My God, boy," he whispered. It's warm." "Take off your wet things," Elias said, his voice calm and steady. "I'll get blankets." He settled them in the loft, wrapping them in his spare wool blankets, and went down to heat broth on the fire. As he was stirring it, another series of desperate knocks came, this time weaker. He opened the door again to find Mrs. Gable and her 2 young children, all of them half frozen, their faces etched with terror. "Our firewood is gone, Elias," she cried, her voice breaking. "We burned everything we had. The house is like ice." "Come in," he said, his voice a quiet command. "Up the stairs, all the way to the top." He led the weeping mother and her frightened children up to the loft, which was now becoming crowded. Anya and Mr. Abernathy made room for them, sharing the blankets. The children, a boy of 6 and a girl of 8, stopped crying almost as soon as the warmth enveloped them, their small bodies instinctively uncurling from their tight, defensive huddles. The cabin had become an ark. Throughout the day, more came. The storm had broken the valley's spirit and its shelters. Mr. Sterling was the last to arrive. He did not knock. The door was simply pushed open and he appeared, his expensive fur coat caked with ice, his face a mask of humbled desperation. He was supporting his wife, who seemed barely conscious. "Our chimney collapsed," he said, his voice stripped of all its usual arrogance. "The house is full of smoke and snow. We couldn't breathe. He looked around at the impossible warmth, at the faces of his neighbors gathered in this strange earthen shelter. His eyes met Elias's. "We were wrong," he said, the words costing him everything. "We were fools. Can you help us?" Elias nodded. "There's room," he said. By nightfall, there were 11 people in the Terrace cabin. They filled the top 2 levels, a huddled, stunned community of refugees. Elias moved between them, distributing broth and hard bread, his movements efficient and calm. He was no longer the strange, grieving boy on the hill. He was their anchor. He was the one who had listened to a different kind of wisdom. Mr. Abernathy sat on the floor of the 2nd level, his back against the gently warm stone wall. He watched Elias tend to the fire on the level below. He had been a carpenter for 50 years. He knew houses. He knew wood and stone in winter. And he knew that what he was witnessing was impossible. "How?" he asked, his voice quiet, directed at no one in particular. "How does it work?" Elias came up the steps and sat near him. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he said simply, "The sun and the earth. The fire helps, but the real work is done by the stone and the hill. The heat comes in, and it can't get out." He looked at the faces around him, illuminated by the soft glow of a single lantern. They were safe. They were warm. His father's drawings, his late-night calculations, his crazy ideas, they were not just theories in a book anymore. They were life. They were shelter. They were a roaring success in the face of a killing storm. He had not just built a house, he had built a harbor. And in the heart of the worst winter in memory, it had held. They lived in the Terrace cabin for 6 days. The snow finally stopped on the 5th day, and on the 6th, the sun emerged, brilliant and blinding on the new white world. The valley was buried. Snowdrifts were piled 20 feet high, swallowing fences and sheds, pressing against the walls of the silent, frozen cabins below. From the glass front of Elias's home, they could see the devastation. Roofs had collapsed. Chimneys had crumbled. It was a scene of utter ruin. Inside the cabin there was life. The initial shock had given way to a quiet, communal existence. The children, resilient and quick to adapt, played on the warm floor of the loft. The adults spoke in hushed tones, their conversations a mix of gratitude and dawning understanding. They watched as the winter sun, low and bright in the southern sky, streamed through the glass, warming the dark stone of the back walls. They could feel the heat being drunk in, a silent, powerful transaction. On the 7th day, a party of men, led by Mr. Abernathy and a humbled Mr. Sterling, ventured down into the valley. The walk that normally took 15 minutes took them 2 hours, wading through waist-deep snow. Elias remained at the cabin with Anya and Mrs. Gable to look after the children and the others. The men returned at dusk, their faces grim. "It's bad, Elias," Abernathy said, his voice heavy. "Worse than we thought. Half the homes are unlivable. We've lost most of the livestock." He looked at Elias, his eyes clear and direct. "If it weren't for you, for this place, some of us wouldn't be standing here right now." Mr. Sterling stepped forward. He stood before Elias, no longer a wealthy rancher looking down on a foolish boy, but a man acknowledging a debt that could never be repaid. "I came to you with mockery," Sterling said, his voice steady. "I called you a fool. I was the fool. You saved my wife's life. You saved all of us. I am in your debt." He extended a hand. Elias looked at the offered hand, then at the man's face. He saw no pride left, only a raw, painful sincerity. He shook it. "We survived together," Elias said. It was not forgiveness. It was a statement of fact. In the weeks that followed, the Terrace cabin became the heart of the valley's recovery. It was the command center, the communal kitchen, the warm place where plans were made. The community, stripped of their individual shelters, became a single, unified body with one goal: to rebuild. But they would not rebuild as before. One evening, as several of them sat on the lowest level, Abernathy turned to Elias. "Your father," he said. "He was always a quiet man, a thinker. I confess, I thought some of his ideas were eccentric." "He saw things differently," Elias said. "He saw them correctly," Sterling corrected, his voice firm. "Elias, we need to learn this. We can't go through another winter like that. Can you teach us?" Elias was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the faces watching him, faces full of hope and respect. He was not a teacher, he was a builder. He got up, went to a small wooden chest, and took out his father's leather-bound journal. He brought it back and placed it on the table in front of Mr. Abernathy. "It's all in here," he said. "Every drawing, every calculation. He wanted to build one himself. He just ran out of time." Abernathy opened the book with a reverence usually reserved for a Bible. He turned the pages, his carpenter's eyes absorbing the elegant, practical designs. Sterling leaned over his shoulder, his own expression one of intense concentration. They saw the detailed plans for the flue system, the notes on thermal mass, the precise angles for the glass walls to capture the winter sun. It was a masterclass in survival, a blueprint for a new way of living in this harsh, beautiful land. "This," Abernathy whispered, his finger tracing a cross-section of the cabin. "This is genius." The knowledge spread. That spring, the valley did not just rebuild, it redesigned. Under Elias's quiet guidance, and with his father's journal as their text, they began to build new homes, terrace homes, cut into the southern slopes of the hills. Abernathy, with his decades of practical experience, helped refine the building techniques. Sterling, with his resources, financed the acquisition of glass and tools for those who had lost everything. It was a community reborn from disaster, stronger and smarter than before. Elias never sought a leadership role, but he became the center around which everything turned. People came to him not for orders, but for confirmation. "Is this stone right, Elias? Is this deep enough?" He would look, nod, and offer a quiet, "It'll work." That was all they needed. His actions had spoken louder than a lifetime of sermons. The boy they had pitied had become the man they revered. Years turned into decades. The valley thrived. A dozen terrace homes now dotted the hillsides, their sod roofs greening in the spring, their glass fronts glittering in the winter sun. The great blizzard of Elias's youth became a landmark in their history, a story told to children about the hard winter when a quiet boy's strange house saved them all. The story was a legend, but the houses were real, tangible proof of a better way. They were warmer, safer, and required a fraction of the firewood. The valley became known for its resilience, a place where people lived with the seasons, not in spite of them. Elias married Anya. Their life was as quiet and steady as the house they lived in. They had 2 children, a son and a daughter, who grew up with the earth as their back wall and the sun as their furnace. Elias taught them how to read the land, how to build with stone, and how to listen more than they spoke. He shared his father's journal with them, adding his own notes in the margins. The book became a living document, a testament to 3 generations. Boulder lived to be a very old dog. His muzzle turned gray, his steps grew slow and stiff. One autumn evening, as the sun set behind the ridge, he lay by the hearth, his head on Elias's lap. He gave a deep, contented sigh, and his great heart simply stopped. Elias sat with him for a long time, his hand resting on the still, warm fur, the silence in the room deeper than it had been in years. The next day, he buried his loyal friend on the hill above the cabin, under the old oak where Boulder had watched him dig all those years ago. He carved the dog's name into a simple fieldstone. There was no ceremony, only a quiet, profound sense of loss for the one creature who had never doubted him. Elias grew old. His dark hair turned the color of snow. The strength in his back and shoulders softened, but his hands, though wrinkled and scarred, never lost their competence. He became the valley's elder, a man of few words but immense presence. He never boasted about what he had done. He didn't have to. The proof was all around him. When he was 72, his heart, which had beat so steadily for so long, began to fail. He died peacefully in his sleep, in the warm upper loft of the house he had built, with Anya holding his hand. The entire valley came to his funeral. They buried him next to his parents and near his dog. Mr. Abernathy and Mr. Sterling were long gone, but their children and grandchildren were there. They stood before the simple grave and spoke of the man who had taught them how to build a home that was also a sanctuary. They commissioned a stone marker. It was a large, flat piece of the same dark granite he had used for the heat-storing walls of his cabin. On it, they carved his name, the years of his life, and a simple epitaph. It did not say he was a hero or a savior. It said, Elias. He built a home and shared the plan. The words were plain, direct, and true, just like the man himself. Centuries pass. The valley changes, but the hills remain. The other terrace homes fall into disuse and are slowly reclaimed by the earth, their sod roofs collapsing, their glass long shattered. But Elias's original cabin endures. It becomes a local landmark, a curiosity. People walk up the hill to see the strange house built into the earth. They marvel at its construction, at the way the great stones are fitted together. They run their hands over the smooth, worn wood of the doorframe. Even now, on the coldest day of winter, if you were to place a hand on the dark stone of the back wall inside, you would feel it. A faint, residual warmth held deep within the rock. It is the memory of 1,000 winter suns, the lingering heat of 1,000,000 fires. It is the enduring legacy of a quiet boy, his loyal dog, and a plan that worked. It is a testament, written in stone and earth, to the simple, profound idea that the best way to survive the cold is not to fight it, but to embrace the warmth that is already there, waiting. The house stands. It holds.